Hi, everybody. It's No Show. I'm Matt Brown, joined as always by Jeff Borman. We are talking today about overtourism. It's a sprawling topic that everybody in the travel business has opinions on. Tourism as an industry makes up around 10% of global GDP. In 2023, 27 million new jobs were in the travel and tourism sector alone, according to the World Travel and Tourism Council. Much of overtourism, as we've been talking about this leading up to this episode, is marketing, right? Venice, it's amazing, but it sort of got enshrined as amazing. Things that you think you have to do when you visit a place. I have to go to Times Square. And I always beg people when they come to New York City, do not go to Times Square. Most New Yorkers universally recognize it as the least attractive place to visit. That doesn't stop a single person from wanting to go see Times Square when they come here. They have to go. Jeff, what do you think about all this? What do you think about over tourism?
I think, first of all, the 27 million new jobs, we need to identify these are not just jobs. These are very meaningful jobs. Uh, Most Americans may not always see it this way, but when a hotel's built outside the US, these are jobs that directly lift people from poverty. They require no degree, no skill set beyond a great smile or work ethic. Opening a large hotel in Barranquilla, Colombia would directly pull 1,000 people and indirectly many more uh, into a better existence, right? A better life for those people. As global brands reach those destinations, a culture of racial and gender equality are often introduced. Health benefits and education programs and things we take for granted in the West are introduced. So it's not just 27 million jobs. These are 27 very significant jobs for affecting lives. I think that needs to be at the start of the conversation of over tourism, recognizing that the massive humanitarian benefits of tourism are really what's driving what we're now calling a problem.
Let's dig into some of the ways that regions and cities and public-private groups are trying to tackle over tourism. Let's just get some of these. Let's do a little table setting here before we dive in. And one of those ways is tourism tax. Now, I'm not opposed to a tourism tax per se. If you're going to visit Venice, you pay an extra $20 at the city gates to come in. And I think on paper, that sounds like an easy way to generate revenue, but it does squeeze budget travelers even more, and it makes expensive places even more expensive. And I feel like it's a band-aid. What do you think about tourism tax?
Um, I think we kind of have to step up a level on the tourism tax. I'm not against it. Why are you doing it? Right? What are you trying to affect by creating a tax? Uh, in New York City, I was recently at the fabulous TWA hotel and I got my bill. It was a 20% tax when you added up all the New York City taxes, and especially the Javits Center tax, I think, or something like that they're calling it, right? So directly pulling money from non-locals into the local, coffers. It's a classic way to do it. Listen, Florida has no state income tax, mainly because they have a sales tax and tourism taxes. Well, if you're a local in Florida, a resident of Florida, many people move there for the reason of not paying a state income tax. Well, you can't have it both ways. So I think you just got to recognize the two together, right? How are you going to fund all of this wonderful infrastructure that people come to visit? It's either out of the locals' pockets or out of the tourist pockets, and it's a lot easier to tax the person that doesn't get to vote.
There are three destinations that we've been reading a lot about that are handling over tourism in three very different ways. Um, Jeff, let's talk a little bit about those. First up is Venice.
Right? They recently introduced an entry fee for those who want to visit just one day and see its iconic canals, and the overnight tax is also in effect. Supposedly, it's been about a year. There's been zero impact to the amount of foot traffic, and that's what concerns Venetians on a daily basis, right? They've raised money to deal with the infrastructure toll that tourism takes on its fragile little city, but it's not reducing tourism, it's not reducing foot traffic, and so it's not improving their lifestyle. Other places are trying similar approaches, right? They're setting limits in Marseille, in France, introducing a reservation system to the number of people who can visit national parks. They're aiming to protect a cove because it's sensitive and vulnerable and degraded, right? But then in Europe, You go the other direction, you have what Amsterdam is doing, where instead of a tax, they are simply reducing flight capacity at Schiphol Airport, right? Fewer people coming in. That's how you do it. They have put an outright ban on new hotel construction. Those things, like Malaga, Spain, is doing something similar, only they're banning short-term rentals completely. So I mean, those different measures are more likely, I think, to give the locals what they're looking for, whereas perhaps the tax just raises the funds, but it's not helping day-to-day Venetians.
Right. Like if you're traveling, if you decided you want to go to Venice, an extra $20 is not gonna stop you for
No,
the right.
not a chance. And in fact, most people don't realize they're paying it because if you arrive by cruise, it's a part of the cruise ticket, right?
Right.
When you book the package, that's there. If you arrive by plane into Schiphol, if you're still lucky enough to get on one of the reduced flights, you're gonna pay that. And in fact, we actually pay this everywhere. I think we did an episode with Matt Cornelius years ago. And I think we talked on that episode about how all these fees and airport fees, they're in the price of your airline ticket anyway, right? It's already bundled up so you don't have to pay an airport tax on arrival. But you're still paying one. Uh, I like what Amsterdam is doing, but I think their measure directly attacks what they're trying to do, right? One of the reasons Amsterdam and locals are frustrated with too much tourism is also the type of tourists that they're getting, right? It's not just the volume. They don't, the volume's a problem, but it's the type of tourists who are coming specifically for the red light district, right? And they're looking to pull back on that. Um, and so one of the things they've done too, even though this is a little bit outside of, over tourism, is uh, they're only allowing residents now, or at least this was proposed. I don't know if it actually happened. They're proposing that only residents could buy cannabis to reduce the cannabis tourism. They don't want that crowd coming from all around America and Europe to have that sort of fun. And similarly with prostitution. Again, I don't know how you regulate this, but they've put a couple different ideas out there to make the city more livable for themselves.
The third way here that we want to talk about that's being deployed in Europe is just straight up aggression. And I think this has gotten a fair amount of coverage in the US.
Yeah.
But Barcelona, I think citizens of Barcelona have sort of, I guess, how would you describe it? They've taken up arms, shall we say?
Yeah, spraying tourists with water guns when they dine in cafes and lobbing paint-filled balloons. I heard that one. This is clearly not how you want to welcome guests of your city, which is honestly not the point. They want to make them feel unwelcome and stop other people from coming in. It's not the right way to do it. Not only is there an ethical concern that I don't think we need to go down the path of, you should probably not be throwing paint filled balloons at anyone for any reason, but it's directly not going to stop the foot traffic that gets off these large cruises. And I think cruises are something we should get into because it's a different kind of tourism. And I think we'll talk about Juneau maybe, where this is a town of 22,000 people in Alaska. And on any given day, the town's population can double when four big boats arrive, right? That makes the infrastructure absolutely unlivable for those people. And so there's a couple different approaches that are going on around the world. Juneau's is quite interesting, I think. They know that the $30 million in passenger affiliated revenue that they need in Juneau, they can't just turn that off. Their town goes bankrupt without it. Their lives change. The education system for their children changes. It lives on those tourism dollars. At the same time, to enjoy living there, they've proposed what they call ship-free Saturdays. I think this is a really good hybrid, right? You still expose the beauty of your town to people. You still gain the local tax dollars that you want for your people, but you give them at least one day of break where they can actually enjoy living there.
And it's all part of, I think, a growing desire to deploy relocation and diversion as solutions here. Earlier this year, Miami Beach actually made headlines for quote unquote breaking up with spring break. They did this video where the city officials urged the longtime crowd of spring breakers who descend upon Miami Beach like vultures to just stay away. To enforce this message, Miami Beach implemented curfews. They prohibited alcohol consumption and loud music on the beaches. That's pretty radical if you've ever been to Miami Beach. They reinforced its ban on short-term rentals, imposed strict traffic regulations during peak travel days in March. I was thinking a little bit about this in the context of demarketing, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean negative marketing or not accepting tourists. It simply means directing tourism demand to alternative destinations. Around 80% of France's 37 million annual visitors, all those people, they congregate in just 20% of the country. So France is trying to kind of divert people away from Paris and spread the money around, which frankly is better for the country's economy as a whole when you don't have a million people each day trying to get into the Louvre.
There's only so much regulation you can do, though, right? I mean, to the Juno example, the day after the community voted to restrict the number of ships or, restrict the days of week to protect Saturdays for locals, Royal Caribbean announced that it would open a new port on the other side of the island and shuttle people to town. Right. So there you go, Juno. Commerce figured it out and it took all of hours. Right. They were ready
Right.
for it. So I don't know if you, let's say, Matt, in your example, the demarketing, if you can't fly as often into Schiphol in Amsterdam, do people start flying more often to The Hague and then just training up? Right. I mean, where people want to go, they will. Where there's a dollar to be made, business people will figure it out. When we get to the idea of what to do about these things, in my mind, it starts with an understanding of what are you trying to solve here, right? Is the existence of a place threatened, right? And Machu Picchu, a place I've been twice, I would say no one should ever be allowed to go more than once, right? It's a very fragile place. It has too many footsteps and it's literally ruining what was built there. You won't be at this pace someday soon. I don't know if it's 20 years from now, you will not be able to see Machu Picchu. It won't exist. The Galapagos Islands belongs to Ecuador. The policy there is a very hard number of people who can visit the islands. At any given time, there's a hard cap. Being in the middle of the Pacific, you can do that. It's much easier to control. But to protect the fragile ecosystem of the Galapagos, that is an absolute must. It's non-negotiable, right? You start unleashing tourism on the Galapagos, there will be no Galapagos. So you must do it. So I think number one is how do you deal with with preventing the destruction of a place because too many people are there? I think the second thing though is if you're trying to impact the reduction in quality of life for the inhabitants, human or animal. Like in a place like Barcelona, the city is not being threatened. Like the structure of the city, Gaudi's wonderful architecture, right? It's not being threatened by so many people being there. But the lives of locals is, and the infrastructure of the city is not meant for it. So you have to deal with that in a very different way. And I think maybe the third section or kind of category is if it hurts the product or the authenticity of a place. How you go about making sure that each of those threats is addressed appropriately, the solution's probably very different.
Tourism is a growth-driven industry, but supporting that growth demands investment. It demands infrastructure beyond just adding more hotel rooms and pools. It requires spending on water systems and sewers and roads and public transportation, law enforcement, waste management, and the upkeep of public spaces. And these aspects of government, aren't as glamorous and aren't as easy as putting up a new hotel, frankly.
Yeah.
And the tourism industry often overlooks those things as priorities because they're big and expensive and on the best of days, incredibly slow to get done. Plus, you have to find time to do them. Let's say you're going to build a new road. You got to find time to build it and then not interrupt the flow of tourists that are keeping the money coming in.
So, I mean, I think if you look at who would support a moratorium on new hotels, you'd find an unusual advocate among existing hotel owners. We don't want more supply, right? I think Key West is maybe one of the best examples of a tiny island. I don't know how many hotel licenses there are, but call it maybe a dozen or 2 dozen, right? A dozen big ones, maybe a couple dozen real small boutique B&Bs, right? But there are no more to be had. And that's not just an over tourism, that's not a reaction to recent over tourism passions. It's been that way for a very long time.
Okay, so wait a minute. So I will. Okay, I'm going to corner you a little bit. So true or false? Hospitality brands ignore overtourism because overtourism is great for business.
False. You asked the wrong question. You said hospitality brands. I said hospitality hotel owners, right? The owner of a hotel. If I'm one of 10 hotels in Key West, I don't want there to be an 11th or a 12th. I want that demand to be constrained. It helps me drive pricing, right? You start creating more supply, pricing power decreases. You share the occupancy that comes in, your occupancy, right? The whole thing's bad, right? You want a concentration. In New York City, let's go from like maybe the tiniest example, like Key West, to New York City, one of maybe the largest, probably the largest hotel market in the US. In the last 15 years, it went through a 20% supply boom, right? And it's because people, city officials and other business people realized there was so much money to be made by putting more hotels in Manhattan. But what it did initially was not great. It was, in fact, terrible for the existing hotel owners, right? Instead of being able to charge $700 a night for a shoebox room in Times Square, now there are 12 more hotels in Times Square, and I can only get 500 or 400 for it, right? Now, Airbnb and the sharing economy is the total opposite of this, right? I think there is a very easy way to enact some of the over tourism complaint or to address some of the complaints of over tourism by locals, because the sharing economy it can grow exponentially, right? It takes years to build a hotel, right? You'll be in planning stage and financing and construction. And like from the minute a developer has an idea that I'm going to buy that land and build a hotel, from the minute they think that to the minute the hotel doors open, it's going to be 5 years, right? Especially in a place like New York, where you've got, 100 different licenses you have to acquire, right? It takes a long, long time. It takes about 10 minutes to put your place up on Airbnb. And so what you've seen in the supply side, and New York City is again a great example of this, this boom in hotel or in non-hotel but overnight stay supply has exacerbated these problems. One of the things that they are doing, besides throwing paint-filled balloons at people in Barcelona, Barcelona is going to cut back on and maybe even a total outright ban on short-term rentals because their neighborhoods are feeling degraded and you can't get into local coffee shops. So I think there's probably a lot more immediate. I'm certain there's a more immediate solution in addressing the short-term rental economies. It's probably a better long-term solution also. And I'm going to be accused of saying that as a hotel guy. I understand the accusation, but hotels have to operate very differently. And I think more likely will go along with a long-term solution that balances out valuable amounts of transit in and out of a place. To the economics of who says there's a problem with over tourism,
Hmm.
you do have very good examples out there. The Greek prime minister recently said, we do not have a problem with over tourism. That economy relies on it. But what they're going to do is they're going to try to spread it out. And Matt, you mentioned this in different ways, spreading in your example, you mentioned trying to disperse the number of places people go, where these hundreds of millions of tourists to France only concentrate in the same places. They want to spread them out across France, right? I think Greece is doing something kind of like that, only it's over the course of a year. Everyone wants to go to Mykonos and Santorini when they're in Greece, but the way the prime minister presented this was it isn't a problem with them taking too many places, people. It's that they all come in March, April, May, and these are wonderful destinations in 6 of the other 9 months of the year too. If you're taking the approach that we're going to spread this out over a greater period of time, it's a much harder thing to do than an outright ban or a cap. And listen, the libertarian in me hates the idea that I'm going to make a parallel with carbon offsets. But what happens if you travel off season? Well, is your footprint, in this case, I mean it literally, less invasive? How do we reward that in a way that's not just cash? If it's only a matter of cash and prices, then travel just goes back to being a luxury for the wealthy. And I don't think we want that.
Let's go lightning round. Where should people definitely not go?
This is a subject where I hold a few inconsistent beliefs, but my answer here very clearly, unequivocally, is Antarctica. Right? I think it should be strictly, totally banned from non-science visitation. The only reason humans even go there is to join the Seven Continents Club. It's a box checking exercise. People want to come back and tell the stories and say they did it. I don't think that's a good enough reason for people to allow people to spoil the last pristine place on the planet.
What's a touristy place you secretly like?
Guilty pleasure, Fort Worth, stockyards. I mean, it's the Disneyfication of cowboy culture, but I love it. It's so much fun. I go every chance I can. I live in Dallas now, as you know, and it's only an hour away. And I mean, I was there a week ago. I mean, and that was not by choice. It was a work event that brought me there. But man, I was happy to go. I love it.
Okay, so that's domestic, international. What's a touristy international place you like?
That I like touristy. You know, I've said Amsterdam so many times today already. I do love Amsterdam. Bali. I love Bali, but it's kind of manufactured. And it's sadly so, right? It has a very it has a very authentic Hindu culture in the middle of the Pacific. But it has also then, that culture has been so exploited for tourists. It's kind of like Hawaii in that way, where, yes, there is culture you can go back 100 years, 200 years to find, but it's been so Disneyfied that you kind of question what's really real anyway.
What's the most overrated tourist destination in the world?
I try to talk everyone out of the Maldives every chance I get. There's no reason to go to the Maldives. You're resort locked. You fly into Mali, and from there, anywhere from 45 minutes to another 2 hour flight because these islands are so spread out. And you fly a tiny little atoll that is essentially just a resort. So it has amazing hotels, some of the most amazing resorts in the world. But it is, if you care about sustainability, awful. You're and that not just because as a European or an American, you're flying 24 hours to get there, but on your way there from Europe or America, you have probably flown over 1,000 better places to be.
I have a hot take. The Caribbean. I think the Caribbean is really overrated.
In relation to the Maldives, I'll go to the Caribbean 100 times. There are beautiful islands in the Caribbean. St. Lucia's gorgeous, right? Jamaica's incredibly beautiful. I love Puerto Rico. There's rainforest and mountain, right? So I don't think the two really, Maldives can't compare. There's so much more in the Caribbean.
The Caribbean is a hot, exploitative mess.
If I could live there now, I'd already be there. We'd be recording this from, I'd be recording this from about an hour outside of San Juan.
Wow, over tourism, Jeff. We solved it. Once again.